Well, for the last 6 weeks, we've been studying David from the Old Testament. Today is our last video on that particular topic, and we're talking about David's heart of confession. We're in the studio with Pastor Ross. Ross, who exactly would benefit from today's topic?
I think anybody who's feeling like they have maybe failed spiritually, morally, relationally, and how do I make a comeback from just really blowing it in life?
Yeah, because that was David's story. Now, he blew it plenty of times in his life, but in Psalm 51, he's writing this confessional psalm. It's one of my favorite psalms. And he's writing it out of the context of a situation that had happened earlier. Why don't you explain that?
Right, it was a real mess. David, to try to make it a long story short, David had seen this woman, he was attracted to her. Her husband was off at war with the army, so David had his kind of Me Too moment, and he brought her, he used the power of his throne to bring her over and slept with her, and then she became pregnant. So he has a problem. The cover-up, they say, is often worse than the crime, right? So he has to cover this up. The way he ended up having to do that is he put her husband in a place in the battle where he was sure to be killed. So he compounded his lust and adultery with murder, and then he just kind of seemed like he forgot about it. The baby was born. He brought her into his palace as one of his wives. This child is born, and he's living for at least 9 months with just total oblivious to the consequences of his actions. When finally this prophet comes to him, the prophet tells a clever story to help David understand, to realize, I screwed up. Yeah. And the prophet pounded him with it, and David, to his credit, admitted. He says, you know what? I have messed up. What I've done is wrong in God's sight. And the psalm is written as he's processing the meaning of that, the implications of his sin before God.
And so it really serves as really a great example of how, because I think everyone can relate to this. In fact, this is one of those times where I think probably everyone watching this video, whatever you're struggling with is not nearly as bad as what Ross just explained David went through. He really screwed up. And we find 3 things in Psalm 51 that kind of bring him back from failure, right?
Right.
So walk us through these 3 things. The first thing you say is this. It's real simple. Confess your mess.
Right. If David could come back, we could come back. But it starts by saying, I did it, by being honest with it. And in Psalm 51, David is saying, look, God, I've sinned against you. I recognize it. I recognize that I've offended you. And he says, I need you to forgive me. And so he's just really honest and open about no excuses. He doesn't say mistakes were made. He's not trying to defer it. He's just really owning it deeply, what he's done.
Yeah, he says in verse 2, wash me clean from my guilt, purify me from my sin, for I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night.
So you can see from that how he takes this really seriously. He's haunted by it. He's not trying to get out of it, taking responsibility. He's not trying to shift the blame to somebody else. He's open, honest, and vulnerable before God.
All right, the second thing, Ross, that we see in this text is for anyone who maybe thinks that step 1 is all they need. All I need to do is admit it. I mean, a lot of political figures are out there, right? As long as I admit that I slept with someone else who's not my wife, it's all better, right? But no, it goes further if you want to be a pursuer of God. And so the second step is you say, cry out to God for help.
Right, so I could recognize that I've blown it, like you said, but unless I go to the next step with that, I'm not going to make a comeback from that failure. So I've got to actually appeal to God. Now, in our culture, people will try to solve their sin in a lot of different ways. Through alcohol, through drugs, through being a philanthropist or a do-gooder or whatever. Really, the only answer for atonement is to take it to God and cry out to him and say, God, I need what you can do. I need what only you can do in my life to change me.
Right, so verse 7, he says, purify me from my sins and I will be clean. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. Give me back my joy again. You have broken me, but now let me rejoice.
So you see that David here is taking it to God. He's not just stuffing it. He's not just trying to bear the burden of it himself, but he says, God, I need you to do what I can't do to restore me again.
And this doesn't mean that we shouldn't go to the person we've offended,
True,
right, and sinned against. That should also include that, right? Going to the person that we've sinned against. If we failed against, we failed with somebody else, maybe with a spouse or a kid or something like that, we should still confess to that person, but also to God.
That's right. It's not either or.
All right, here's the third thing that we see from the story. You say this, commit to honoring God. And we see this in verses 11 through 15.
Yeah, so we can confess our sin, we can take it to God, receive his forgiveness, but God has an agenda for us, a purpose for us that goes back more than just bringing us back to that ground zero, bringing us back to neutral. Because David had served God in many ways in his life, and he'd been derailed from that by his sin. So David is saying, I long to get back to that place where I'm serving you again, where my life has purpose, and you're using me in the lives of others again. And so this is the thing, to fully make a recovery from spiritual, moral, or relational failure, we have to be willing to say to God, I'm committed to doing it your way from now on.
Yeah, so it's not just confessing what was wrong and turning toward God again and accepting his forgiveness, but it's actually now moving forward in a new kind of life. Moving in, like we like to say, find out what pleases God and do it. Right. And it's moving forward in a new lifestyle. Not out of penance, right? Because some people might say, well, yeah, God won't forgive me, he won't accept me until I start proving it by moving forward.
Right. I have to do these 10 things to make. No, I'd say what it does is it reflects a sense of being connected to God again. I've been separated from him. Now I'm connected to him. I'm connected again to his purpose. I'm connected again to his leading. And he wants to restore me so that I can experience all the wholeness of the life that he created me for.
And on a practical level, is it Ross, is it just good enough to say, I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps and by the power of my own will, I'm going to start making better choices, or is there something more?
Well, you'll see in Psalm 51, he calls out to God to do this. He says, restore to me, don't take your Holy Spirit from me.
Right.
And you see the importance of the Holy Spirit to make that happen, for God to really do that in our lives. But all we're saying today in this point is that I have to agree with God that that's the direction that I want him to take me.
Yeah, and Paul said it like this in Galatians 5. He said we should keep in step with the Spirit. So there is a sense of cooperate, like we're walking. We realize, in fact, I think if not Paul, but if David would have realized this, if he would have kept in step with the Spirit from the beginning,
all along,
he probably wouldn't have made some of those. He wouldn't have failed so tremendously, right?
Exactly.